What is up, my smileys? Welcome to my channel, and if you're not in here, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be discussing the iconic episode two-parter Degrassi Time Stands Still. This is part 1. It is the 7th episode of season 4 of the Canadian television series Degrassi Next Generation, and it originally aired October 4th, 2004 on CVT television and on December 3rd, 2004 on the N. So sit back, relax, grab your snacks, grab your popcorn, whatever you need, because this is going to be in a very interesting episode. And then if you're not subscribed already, subscribe, like this, and turn on your notifications and enjoy the video, my smileys. The episode opens up with Rick being bullied by Spinner and Jimmy, who toss him in the dumpster.
Little snack? Something.
Yeah. See you tomorrow, freak.
After the credits are over, Spinner pulls up to the school in his car and heads inside as the bell rings. Rick comes out from hiding with spray paint and vandalizes Spinner's car, drawing a big old X. Heading to class, Rick literally runs into Jimmy, rounding him in a corner, which Jimmy insults him, and Rick insults him back when Jimmy notices Snake is witnessing, seizing the opportunity to Snake asks Jimmy to name the 3 world's largest rivers in order and asks the question about the NBA championship. Jimmy answers correctly, as the result is now one of Rick's team members for a trivia show called Whack Your Brain. Heather St. Clair was supposed to be on the team, but according to Snake, she came down with mono, much to... In the B plot, Joey's in his home being told by his realtor that his open house is the day after tomorrow. He has to clean. He tells her, "What can I do besides cleaning?" And while they're discussing it, Craig comes downstairs, tells Joey that he's sick, and Joey gets frustrated and tells Helen to get out. Later in the day, Emma Nelson runs up to Toby and Rick, who are walking together. She has an index card to study from the contest, and she is about to quiz Rick on them when he announces that he's quitting the team. Emma replies that the finals are tomorrow, and they discuss the fact that Jimmy has now joined the team. Toby encourages to talk to Snake about bullying like he said before, and asks Snake to reconsider, but Rick doesn't want Jimmy to guess that it was him who got kicked him off the team. Emma encourages Rick to work with Jimmy on the team, since Rick said he came back to Degrassi to show people he's changed. Rick isn't convinced, but Emma tells him that they need him on the team and smiles at him. Rick, who's encouraged by Emma and Toby, tries to talk to Mr. Radish, the principal, about the fact that Jimmy is harassing him. Mr. Radish does not take Rick seriously, and to think that Rick is only upset that Jimmy is less than friendly towards him, even though this is obviously not the first time Rick's approached him about it. Mr. Radish tells Rick that he needs to put effort into making friends with Jimmy and ask him to come back if anything serious happens. Throughout the talk, Mr. Radish does not give Rick much room to tell him what's really happening, but Rick isn't being forward about it either. In the parking lot, Spinner and Sean Cameron find the damage done to Spinner's car, and Jay and Alex pull up in Jay's also vandalized car. They guess that the damage was done.
Somebody picked the wrong guys to mess with.
Someone named Rick Murray.
You guys are gonna want to get this off your clear coat before.
Spinner wants to tell Mr. Radish about it, but Sean resorts that Mr. Radish will want to know why Rick did it, and Jay agrees to decide to leave the principal out of it and get back at Rick another way. Toby is approached by Spinner, Jay, and Alex, who tells them where Rick is, and Toby refuses to tell them, and Jay pushes his head in the fountain, which is causing Toby's lip to bleed. Arriving at the preparation for Whack Your Brain, Toby is confronted by Snake about why he's bleeding, but he brushes it off as a skateboard accident. Ricky and Jimmy argue about who hurt Toby's lip, and Jimmy tells Rick to back off. Rick says he's been suffering for weeks and that no one deserves that, and Jimmy seems affected by his words, realizing that Rick believes nobody should suffer from his crimes and does not care.
Nobody does.
After work, Joey comes home to find his ex-girlfriend Sydney at his house. As a result of Greg calling her, Craig has told her about the money problems, and Sydney wants to help Joey sell his home.
After that whole viciously dumping me for Caitlin thing. Come on, Joey. We're not 18.
Sydney ends up leaving since Joey seems practically speechless and somewhat upset about her being there suddenly. As they practice for the contest, Rick is answering all of the questions. Snake throws at them until a sports question comes up, but Rick puts his hand over his belt but doesn't answer, obviously, to let Jimmy answer the question instead.
Futility perfected.
While leaving practice, Rick and Jimmy exchange compliments about their trivia skills. Alex and Spinner and Jay approach them to pick on Jimmy, but stands up for Rick, telling them to give it a rest. As Rick, Emma, and Jimmy and Toby walk away, Rick turns around and makes an X with his arms, taunting Alex and Jay and Spinner with what he did, which makes them all furious.
Bad move, freak.
Toby comes over in Rick's house after school, where Rick seems to be overjoyed over the events of the day. Rick's mom says that Rick told her that him, Jimmy, and Toby have practically become inseparable.
Worry too much, Mother. Pretty soon Toby and I will be running that place.
Toby seems confused but goes along with it. Rick is obviously feeling confident about winning Jimmy over. The next day, Craig is just as sick, but decides to go to school after Joey yells at him for calling Sydney. Joey obviously feels embarrassed about his financial situation. Craig tells Joey that he called Sydney because she would at least sell the house for good money.
Joey, you'd sell it for beads. Sydney won't.
Rick approaches Emma and thanks her for the advice about Jimmy, adding that she is his guide. Emma seems uncomfortable, but smiles and replies that she's glad things worked out for him. Rick has a friendly talk with Jimmy about the competition when he comes into school, and
Radich, line 1. Wants a suit back.
but he brushes off the tease about his suit from Paige Michalchuk. During the Wacky Brain contest, Rick answers a sports question that causes them to tie the game. Celebrating their tie, Rick holds Emma's hand too long for it just to be friendly. Emma yanks her hand away, but Rick brushes it off. In the bathroom during the break before the tiebreaker, Jimmy compliments Rick about knowing so much, and Rick asks Jimmy why didn't he answer the sports question. Jimmy says he had a brain freeze and that golf isn't a sport anyway. While he's about to leave the bathroom, Spinner and Jake come into the bathroom and compliment Rick about how much he knows, asking if Rick will do the lightning round, aka the tiebreaker. Rick replies with the confidence, but he hesitates as he's about to walk between the two to leave. They tell Rick that things are cool between them now. Once Ricky and Jimmy are gone, Spinner asks whether Alice will be able to set up a prank that they've planned for sure. Jay assures him she will have no problem. Sydney comes back to Joey's house. Obviously, Joey decided that Craig was right about taking Sydney's help, and Joey apologizes about how things ended with them. Sydney brushes off his apology. She suggests that he makes an atmosphere for the opening house using magic or maybe baking a pie in the oven. Her experience in real estate is already invented. Before playing his part of the lightning round, Rick whispers to Emma that it's all for her. Emma again feels uncomfortable. Rick answers enough questions that beat the other team and win the game for Degrassi. The crowd cheers for Rick, and it looks like his life is turning around, but still in the center of the stage. Yellow paint and feather drop down on him. The audience turn to silent and then turn into laugh. Rick seems mortified. Emma approaches him to comfort him about what happened, saying that it makes other people look childish and telling him that he's the smartest person in Degrassi and no one will forget that. Already thinking Emma liked him, Rick grabs the back of her head and tries to kiss Emma with more force than necessary. Emma is shocked and ends up telling him that she only pitied him and tells him to stay away from her. While cleaning up for the open house, Caitlin comes back from Africa and asks why Sydney's name is on his lawn. Rick returns home to an empty house, heartbroken, and takes out a wooden box. Inside the box, laying in the padding, is what is presumed to be his father's gun. He removes his glasses and stares at the gun before the episode ends. Rick heads to Degrassi with his father's handgun in his backpack despite being given permission to go home by Mr. Radich until everyone has calmed down and an issue has been resolved. Toby tells him to go home, but he replies saying that this is the only one day he wants to actually be at Degrassi. Rick walks to the cafeteria upon seeing Paige. Approaching him, he reaches for the gun in his bag to get back at her for starting the anti-bullying campaign. Paige tells him that she thought the prank was sickening and childish and out of line. Hearing this, he puts the gun away, says sorry for hurting Terry. Rick decides to forget about his plans and places the gun in his locker, still covered in paint, but he goes to the bathroom and he begins to clean up. He hears footsteps and hides in the stall. As Spinner and Jay walk into the washroom, arguing. Jay notices that Rick is in the stall, so he falsely blames Jimmy, noting that the prank would have not been successful if Jimmy hadn't been the inside man. Spinner is instantly confused by this, although he goes along with Jay in the end, once he catches on to the joke, thinking it'll lead to a fight between the two. Hearing this, Rick leaves the washroom and looks for Jimmy, taking his backpack along with him, and he finds Jimmy near his locker. Jimmy asks how he's holding up and tells Rick that he's got his back if anyone bothers him again. Much to Rick's disdain, in which he replies with, "You stabbed me in the back, you set this whole thing up." Jimmy replies saying he defended Rick. Sees Rick draw the gun out of his bag and asks nervously, "Is that real?" Rick ignores him and points the gun at Jimmy, accusing faking his friendship and that Jimmy made him do this. Jimmy backs away slowly as Rick closes his eyes, and he shots fire, and the bullet hits Jimmy in the back, knocking him to the other ground. Other students around the area start running away, and Greg, who is nearby, walks down the hall to see Jimmy laying on the floor. Rick finds Emma with Toby and Sean, and he apologizes for kissing Emma, and Sean grabs Emma and urges them to go. As they turn away, Rick screams, "Don't turn away from me." They turn back at Rick and approaches them slowly, and he tells Emma that she has made his list. Rick accuses Emma of flirting with him and making him think that she loved him and cared about him, because Sean calmly tries to reason with Rick and tells him that giving in to his anger will just make his life even worse. Rick struggles with his moment, but points to the gun at Emma, saying it's too late, I've already shot someone. Before he fires, Sean lunges for the weapon, and both Sean and Rick struggle for a moment. When the gun goes off, both Sean and Rick drop on the floor, while Rick having been shot by his own gun. The school enters a lockdown. Both parents and emergency services start arriving at the school. While they comb the school, Sean is escorted to a room where Toby is being questioned by the detective, shocked about what has happened. Toby admits that Rick being bullied every day, he refuses to call Rick his friend and repeatedly calls him a psycho. In another room, Spike and Snake are comforting a visibly shaken Emma. Mr. Radich enters and asks Snake to look through Rick's emails for warning signs. Snake is enraged by this and blames Mr. Radich for this incident.
Now the groundbreaking 2020 hindsight policy kicks into gear.
Since he failed to see warning signs before Rick approached him earlier, the two proceed to argue, although they stop when Spike intervenes by asking them to stop.
Emma, they're going to want to speak to all of the witnesses. I'm sorry.
Hazel, Paige, and the other juniors take over in another classroom while the police continue the search. The search concludes with the guidance teacher visiting their classroom. She calls in Hazel to the hall and tells her the horrifying news that Jimmy had been shot. Hazel begins to break down in tears as the other students are escorted out of the school by the police. As Jay, Alex, and Spinner evacuate, Jay mentions to Spinner that he thought Rick had shot him, but Spinner replies by telling them that Rick had shot Jimmy instead, and that someone will eventually find out the events of the transfer in the washroom. Jay stops in and tells him that he needs to keep quiet, that they haven't done anything wrong, but Spinner refuses, saying that Jimmy is his best friend and that they might have caused his death.
Craig, are you okay? Jimmy got shot. What?
Local press approaches Greg, who's among the students, asks if he knew the victim or not, but Craig is flustered and tells them that the victim has a name. The press continues to pester until Caitlin intervenes and tells them to back off.
Then step aside and let me. Here's your story for you. Local, insensitive reporter pummeled my famous colleague.
The press introduce themselves to Toby and asking if he was his friend, and they ask him whether or not did Toby try to stop him, to which Toby resorts angrily saying, "What was I supposed to do?" The press ask him whether or not Rick said anything before he died. Toby is visibly shocked by this question and is led by his family, indicating that he just learned of Rick's death despite being there when Rick was shot. Jimmy is taken to the hospital where Hazel, Paige, and Spinner visit along with others, and they find out that he's paralyzed from the waist down and are deeply saddened. That evening, Toby, Ashley, and their mother go to the Simpson-Nelson house to watch the news. Clearly devastated, Spike cannot accept the fact that the shooting has taken place in Degrassi. Emma comments that the Degrassi isn't a statehood, that it's a school. Spike responds by saying that's the point. No shooting should ever have taken place to any school. Snake comes in by saying that they all failed to take Rick's bullying seriously and that Rick just hadn't been simply unpopular. Ashley is irritated by the shooting, and especially because the victim is Jimmy, says that her Rick was a psycho and certified freak. Her words upset Toby that slams the remote on the table and leaves the room. Emma comments that Rick was not simply a psycho, but he was Toby's friend.
I am playing God.
Hazel and Paige remain at the hospital while guilt-ridden Spinner cries in his room. Ellie and Sean watch the local news on their TV, as do Caitlin and Joey and Craig. The episode ends when Toby is going to a growing candlelight vigil in the front steps of Degrassi. He is joined by Emma, and the two tearfully embrace. Alright, my smileys, that concludes today's video. This took longer than I expected because the first part I finished was a year ago, and the half of the part 2 I also finished a year ago, and I guess I didn't have time to come around to it, but now I'm starting to finish it right now. It is Sunday, March 2nd, 2025. So that's when I am done with this video, but I hope y'all enjoy. Make sure you like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and I'll see you, my smileys, in the next video.